us, so we'll give it one more minute here while folks get logged in, but welcome. Thank you so much for joining us at the end of probably what is a very, very busy day for you all. All right. A couple more folks coming in here. And great, we'll go ahead and get started. Well, welcome. I'm Jennifer Stater from the Indian Education for All Unit, Montana Office of Public Instruction. Welcome to our third Advocacy Award recipient webinar series with Miranda Murray. I am really, really excited to hear more about teaching, current events, and possibly controversial issues in the classroom. I know Miranda has just prepared an extraordinary presentation, so I hope we all learn a lot from it this evening. I would like to do a land acknowledgement, and in the spirit of healing, I acknowledge and honor the original peoples of the southwestern Montana, Helena, Montana area, the Salish, the Blackfeet, the Kootenai, and other tribal nations, Crow, Chippewa, Northern Cheyenne, Chippewa Cree, Nez Perce, Nakota, Dakota, Little Shell, Assiniboine, Shoshone, and many other indigenous people who call it home, past, present, and future. This is a webinar, so please understand that we do have a few norms. One is that we are recording. All will be joining the meeting on mute. Please sign in on the chat and on the sign-in sheet, which I realized I have not opened. Let me make sure to open this for access here. I knew I had forgotten something right now. Let's enter. There we go. Okay, so the sign-in sheet is officially open for you. Excellent. All right, so you can sign in on the chat and on the sign-in sheet. The sign-in sheet is really for those seeking renewal units. There will be a Menti this evening. If you're not familiar with Menti, it is a very free, cool online interactive tool. If you do not have an extra device in order to log on to the Menti, you can answer in chat. We will be providing the code and the link in the chat. The feedback survey, it will be open the last 10 minutes of the webinar, and it will only be available for 24 hours. And again, this is mostly for renewal units. And if it's not there, if you would just like to provide us feedback, however, we do read every word of it and we take it to heart. And do please participate in the chat. Please ask questions, please share ideas. For those of us new to the series, this is the Advocacy Award recipient webinar series. This award, it was for the Teresa Veltkamp Advocacy Award for Excellence in Indian Education. Teresa Veltkamp was an elementary teacher who brought all of her passion for Indian education to her career as an Indian education specialist. Teresa was one of the first coordinators and developers of the Indian Education for All Best Practices Conference. Stay tuned for information on the 2022 conference. We are not quite there yet with our planning, so bear with us. We've had a lot of questions about that lately. And it is humbling to be able to share this space with award winners that are here in her honor. One of Teresa's best friends and colleagues said Teresa's approach to Indian Education for All was a very personal one. She deeply recognized the importance of relationships as a foundation for her work. Her passion was reflected in her unwavering dedication to Indian Education for All, both as a teacher and as an Indian education specialist. Teresa advocated for Indian Education for All, not just as a legal obligation, but more important, a moral one. And about our presenter this evening, Miranda Murray is a 2021 Advocacy Award recipient. Miranda Murray is a Yankton Sioux descendant of Fort Peck. Miranda is an Indian education instructional coach for Great Falls Public Schools. She is incredibly accomplished when it comes to Indian education and Indian student advocacy in her district. This past year, Miranda and her teaching partner, Jordan Langford Forrester, shared their dedication to the heavy lifting by helping to create and facilitate 3 webinar series that impacted over 400 education, educators with professional development on the essential understandings. The feedback for those webinars glowed with enthusiasm for both the content as well as the demeanor of the facilitators. Miranda and others have created a new teacher learning hub course based on this essential understandings work. And the registration process will open in November. Please watch our website for it, as well as I will put more information to contact me if you'd like to get on a waiting list once I get done with the introduction and can get back to the chat. So that, again, that hub course will open in December. Miranda has previously been recognized as a 2019 Salute to Women Award recipient in the creative arts, nominated and selected for the integration of creative arts in Indian education for all in education, a 2016 5 Under 35 award recipient for an IEFA related book she illustrated. She has also presented her work at multiple Indian Education for All Best Practices conferences, as well as at the NIEA, the National Indian Education Association Conference, and the Wyoming Indian Education Conference. Miranda, your enthusiasm and warmth are contagious. Thank you for your advocacy in Indian Education for All with Great Falls students and staff, as well as sharing your knowledge and passion with hundreds of teachers from around the state. And we're really excited for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining and having patience. I'm sure Jennifer will be able to open that sign-in sheet momentarily, so don't fret about that. Again, my name is Miranda Murray, and I'm really excited to be here this evening. I'm going to get my screen shared here so that we can get on with our topic. I want to say thank you also to Jennifer for putting together this webinar series. I assume many of you have been able to attend the other two presentations, and it's been really exciting to see everyone's perspectives on different topics and being able to address topics as they've been presented to us. So we kind of put a call out for things that people might be interested in or want to know more about, and we were able to do that here in this webinar series. And so I'm really excited that we're going to be doing that in that spirit. Jennifer and I will be monitoring the chat. I will do my best to make sure that I am seeing anyone's questions. Please feel free to ask questions along the way, and please feel free to participate, because I'll be asking some questions of you and your ideas of how the answers to some of these questions kind of mesh with your world in your educational environment. Usually in these webinar series, we have a wide variety of educators, whether that looks like educating in a traditional classroom environment from elementary all through secondary, or being in a different kind of environment. We've had people from the Forest Service and from museums and from lots of different avenues of education. Education looks different all over the place. So I'm really excited to have everyone here this evening. I want to first share a little bit about myself. And this is pertinent, I think, to kind of the content that I'll be talking about tonight, which is talking about contemporary issues and potentially controversial topics. And so when I was thinking about how I wanted to go about talking about these things, because if I were to go through a list of all of the topics and like give examples on those kinds of things, we could be here for days, and that would be great. We just don't have that kind of time this evening. So I wanted to talk about teaching strategies. So we're going to spend a large portion of our time at the beginning here talking about teaching strategies. And that doesn't necessarily mean that these teaching strategies are specific to Indian Education for All. It means that they're specific to education and teaching our kids. And so I will get into that. But what that means is I need to acknowledge my place in the conversation. So as Jennifer stated, I am a Yankton Sioux descendant. I did not grow up with my culture. I grew up knowing about my culture and knowing that connection. But I have had the multiple incredible opportunities to continue to reconnect with my culture through my job and through the people I get to work with every day. And I think that it's really important that I navigate where my voice falls when I'm having a conversation, when I'm having a conversation about topics that are really sensitive. We're going to talk about those. Because, for example, sometimes we get calls out as instructional coaches for things like looking for Native lesson writers, looking for Native authors. And while we do our best to help our students understand that this quantifier that we all are familiar with is harmful, it's not appropriate for me to put my voice in front of others in those instances. So I always like to kind of figure out where I fall into the conversation before starting the conversation with students and or adults. I often am working with teachers to make sure that I'm doing my best to be an ally when it matters and to support myself and my family when it matters as well in terms of the relationship to the topic we're talking about. So these pictures here, I just wanted to share with you are my partner, Jesse. He is an employee of our school district as well, and my son, Matthew, our son, Matthew, and he is a 4th grader in our school district. And I'm so very lucky to be a part of the department that helps provide services to students like my son. And so this makes this work incredibly important to me. IFA is really important for all of our students. It's important for our Native students for that sense of identity and connection and place in the world. And it's important for our non-Native students to understand their place in the world and their relationship to the world around them. So Jennifer is going to bring up the mentee. She'll give some directions here, but before she gives the directions of how to access this, I want you to think about what are 3 concerns. You'll have the opportunity to put in 3 words or word phrases, 3 concerns or emotions you have when thinking about teaching a controversial issue in your classroom. Again, if you cannot access the mentee, Jennifer will give those directions here in a moment. You can put these emotions or concerns in the chat.
Okay, too many buttons to click. Bear with me. There we go. Okay, so if you go to either the link that I placed in chat, you can click directly on that and it should bring you to this page. Otherwise, go to www.menti.com and use the code 87850839 or 0839. And you will have the opportunity. I actually expanded it so you can put up to 5 answers because you may have lots of different emotions or concerns, especially at this juncture. And if you do not have a device where you can access this website, please feel free to answer in chat. And it is a regular word cloud. So as you see words expand and get smaller, you can see how many people are possibly putting very similar answers. And hopefully we'll see that some of you have a lot of the same concerns, which will help direct Miranda to give us some advice this evening. So again, www.menti.com, code 87850839.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'll give everyone a little bit of time to reflect on what those concerns or emotions might be and have those enter into the word cloud. You can see that we're seeing a lot of really similar ideas and emotions. So as people are entering, I'm going to start kind of talking about these different ideas and emotions. So we're seeing things like being worried about not having the right information. So lack of knowledge, having blowback from parents, having the correct information, maybe accidentally saying the wrong thing, not having enough background knowledge. That's a really common issue, not only for controversial or contemporary issues, but also for IFA. We'll talk about that. I'm seeing things like there's worry and fear, not wanting to trigger or add trauma to some of these topics. Definitely a valid concern. We will be talking about that as well. I'm seeing like family or parent disapproval, maybe. maybe having that outside force entering into your classroom and not knowing how to respond to that. I'm also seeing a couple of things that are going along the lines of accidentally alienating someone or pushing someone in your classroom or in that educational environment away without knowing that you're doing that, maybe invalidating an experience. Yeah, lots of really great responses. I really appreciate you participating in that. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my screen here. And so what I want you to think about when you're reflecting is those things that come up for you, because there were some answers in there that were things like exciting, hope, bringing these topics to the surface might be a good thing. And I think that that can definitely be true for everyone. And I think what is maybe missing for some people is the way in which to get there and the way to handle these topics. So in the chat, I want you to list any topics that you might have found to be or think might be controversial to teach in your classroom. Maybe topics you've wanted to teach, but have been hesitant to teach because you're not sure how to navigate that. And what this is going to do for me going forward is make sure that I am able to talk about some of these things in my presentation to make it really personalized to your experience and make sure that we're hitting on topics that are important to you to learn more about. A lot of the time when we are sharing things that we're a little bit nervous to teach, other people have had those same experiences. So I'm seeing a lot of several MMIPs, critical race theory, religion, boarding schools, immigration, difficult truths about history, absolutely. Racism, every child matters, relationship to boarding schools, absolutely. Lots of contemporary issues, things like COVID, politics. Wonderful, thank you for sharing your thoughts. So, and several LGBTQ plus concerns, talking about those topics. I saw Columbus in there, saw colonialism or colonization. Yeah. So a lot of times when we're thinking about what might be a controversial issue, we're thinking about things that are very specific to polarizing. So something that might have varying or opposing positions, and we're concerned about getting heated debate or discussion in our classroom. Obviously, depending on the age, we're going to be talking about age appropriateness here. But controversial topics can include many different things. They can be sensitive or emotional topics, especially depending on the group of students you're talking to. So for example, MMIP will be a sensitive or emotional topic to talk about with students in your classroom, because it affects everyone around us. We'll get to some examples of that. Learning about history from multiple perspectives, making sure that we are able to provide diverse perspectives in our history can sometimes be a controversial topic. Issues that bring up those polarizing opinions certainly are the baseline for controversial topics in the classroom. But having a legitimate difference of opinion and the issue being known by people who have qualified knowledge. So sometimes people have difference of opinion and it doesn't necessarily make it a controversial topic. So a good example of that is flat Earth. There are many people that have a difference of opinion on whether or not the Earth is round or flat, but qualified people in that area can come to an agreement, and therefore that makes this issue not necessarily controversial. I hope that makes sense. And then any issue that matters to members of the public. And that's really the definition of a contemporary issue, right? If it matters to a member of the community, especially a member of your community, that's going to be the most meaningful if you're talking about contemporary issues in your area. These are what those contemporary issues really are about. Okay, so one of the first things that I would suggest you do, especially if you work in a school district, is locate your school district policy or maybe lack of policy for teaching controversial issues. So this is the policy in my school district. Again, I work in Great Falls Public Schools. All of our school board policies are public information, as they should be in your area as well. And it has been really interesting. I'm working on my master's work, and part of our assignments have been to locate certain policies on a given topic. And what I'm seeing from people around the state is that a lot of these policies are not accessible to the teachers, let alone the community in their school district. And I think that policy is really important because it, first of all, gives you as the teacher or educator a really clear understanding of what is quote unquote acceptable in your school district. It should give some clear guidelines, especially around academic freedom. This is something that all school districts are supposed to abide by. And so having those clear understandings and definitions can really be helpful to you, especially if your concerns are to do with community or parent pushback. Several of you put those as your answers in that word cloud about concerns. And I think that one of the things that we often see is when we are talking with parents, if they have concerns and we can give them clear policy about what we should be doing in our classroom, how we are teaching students, what information that they have access to, it becomes a lot clearer and you're a lot safer in your classroom in terms of making sure like I'm following within the guidelines of our school district, academic freedom, whatever guidelines you're falling under or pointing out. And it gives you a little bit of protection, which should give you a little bit of ease of mind that you're doing the things that are okay to do in your classroom. If you ever have a doubt that you should be teaching something, you can certainly reach out to veteran teachers in your school district, ask about their experience with certain topics. You can reach out to administration, depending on your area, and you can see if that is something that you can get support on. Knowing where your boundaries are is very important. And so our guidelines are very specific to students having academic freedom, which has to do with access to information. This is used a lot of times in libraries, but it's also very important to the classroom as well. So we've talked quite a bit about controversial issues, but I also want to make sure I'm focusing on contemporary issues this evening. And these are not exclusive. A contemporary issue is not inherently a controversial issue. However, they do go hand in hand. And I think it's important to note, just given the state of the world, that most of the time, contemporary issues become controversial issues because we live in a very polarizing time. Therefore, there's opportunity for polarizing conversation to happen. And we all know as educators that our students do a really good job of taking in information that they hear from other people. Maybe that's on social media, maybe that's at their home, and regurgitating or parroting that information, even if they don't understand what they're saying. So we're going to go through some teaching strategies now to really hone in on how this can look in your classroom in an effective, meaningful way for learning. So the first order of business is we need to establish space. We need to establish space for these things to occur in your classroom. I would like you in the chat to please put something that you need as an adult in a space to have difficult conversations. So for example, that might mean peers that you feel comfortable talking with? What is something you need in a space to have a difficult conversation? Great, lots of responses. Thank you for participating. So we're seeing things like having voice, giving up, knowing that I can have a voice in that space, having physical distance or closeness depending on the conversation. Excellent point. Well-established boundaries. So like guidelines for our conversation, knowing what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, knowing what to expect is a big part of that, which is incredibly important for our students. An established trust or relationship is also very important. We know that building relationships with our students leads to a lot of good things. We've probably heard that as being a teaching strategy for like a million different things. The amount of times we've been told to build relationships with our students, it's important, and it makes a difference. Having peers that I know respect me and listen, right? If I'm in a space where I know that this person and I don't get along already, I'm going to be more hesitant to share my opinion. I might not want to be vulnerable and tell those things. I might want confidentiality. The topic might be such that I don't want anyone to share what I've said outside of the classroom. Room to walk. I love that. Our kids are so confined into their seats sometimes that actually in a situation where you're feeling uncomfortable and you need you start to feel that in your body, kids especially express emotion through their body, and the emotion could be uncomfortableness or anger or anxiety, and they might need space to move, just like adults need space to move. The ability to move around and pace or walk in a safe way could be an important aspect to the classroom. Permission to make mistakes. I love that. We do not do enough demonstrating from the teacher perspective of making mistakes and it being okay. That's one of the big things that'll help bring success to your classroom, is letting go of that ego and that fear of not knowing the answer or not being correct, for example, because we are giving students permission to be human if we are also being human. We're demonstrating to students that it is important that everyone makes mistakes. It's okay if I don't know how to spell this word on the board. I know the resources to help figure it out, which is what a real world application we want our students to understand. A listening audience, absolutely. Knowing that I'll be listened to, acknowledging difference of opinions. Great. Knowing that we don't have to agree to have a good conversation. Calm voices, absolutely. When a person in a conversation starts to get agitated and you can hear that in their voice, we match that kind of energy, and then that's when things get out of control and heated really quickly. Excellent responses. Thank you for participating. So these are all things that you brought up. These are things that you brought up. So we need safety. We need to feel safe in the environment, and we as adults need to feel safe, which means our students absolutely need to feel safe in their environment. And that doesn't just look like physical safety. That's important. That distance that we were talking about, this might be, depending on the topic, you might need some space to give everyone some breathing room. Depending on the topic, you might need to be doing small groups and have a closer, smaller, quieter conversation that is going to lead to a safe space. We need the ability to maybe physically get up and move around. We are not going to have any room for blame or shame or guilt in our conversations. And this is precedent set by you as the educator in the classroom. If the expectation in your classroom is that we are talking about things we are not, for example, if we are talking about one group's negative actions in history, that is not going to apply to students who might belong to that group in our classroom, because there's no learning that's going to happen there. And we know that as adults as well. We need to be prepared for questions we don't know the answer to. You need to be very comfortable with saying, I don't know, but I know how we can find out. demonstrating to students that we can learn the answer together and that I, as the teacher, don't have to know everything, first of all, takes a lot of pressure off of me in teaching my lessons. One of the main concerns I hear with the teachers I instructionally coach for IFA is, what if I say something wrong? What if I don't know the answer? What if they ask me something and I say the wrong thing? And I say, that's okay. Because when your students learn that we can look up the information together and that you as the educator are not expected to know everything, that's literally the point of education, is to develop lifelong learners. And if we demonstrate to students that at some point in their life, they're going to know everything, that's not realistic, first of all, and it's not helping them grow the skills to be lifelong learners. Again, knowing your students and building those relationships. These kinds of conversations are not happening on the first day of school. These kinds of conversations are happening after there's established boundaries and rules for discussion versus dialogue. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And a little bit of a relationship has formed between students in the classroom. Not every student is going to have a relationship with every student in the classroom, but they are going to know by the time we have these conversations that it is a safe place for me to share my opinions and my ideas on a topic. We want our students to be learning all of the time, but I think another part of letting that ego go in our classroom is knowing that students will learn what they are meant to learn in that moment. This is something that we also talk about with oral tradition. It's inherently an Indigenous practice that we repeat lessons over and over. We tell stories over and over, because every time you hear a story, you're going to learn something new. So when we pick a theme or a moral out of an oral tradition story, everyone's going to have something different to say, and that's correct, because everyone hears what they're ready to hear in that moment. And so when you're talking about these kinds of issues, you're not going to bring everyone to the same finish point at the end of the conversation in that day. And that is because everyone is at a different point in the start. So we need to be ready to accept that everyone's going to come to different conclusions. And it's not necessarily that they're wrong, it's that that's where they are. That's where they're ready to be. That's what they were ready to hear. I also want to put circle talks in there, because part of the space that I think is really important when you're talking about issues is creating a space where everyone feels equal. This does not necessarily have to mean that the entire class is in a circle. This could be small group circles, but we're not sitting in rows facing the same direction, because that feels like it stunts conversation. We want to be showing everyone that we all have different places in the classroom. We're all equals in a circle. We're not putting one person above the other. And that can include the teacher. Bringing yourself out of being at the front of the room and being a part of the conversation or a part of the circle can really bring that sense of safety and respect to your classroom environment. And then we want our students to be critical thinkers. We want our students, whenever I'm thinking about what I'm teaching students, standards are important. What the curriculum says is important, but in my opinion, we are preparing students to be adults. And so we want our students to take in information and make decisions for themselves in an educated way. We are teaching students to be critical thinkers. We're teaching students to read something and say, that doesn't seem like the whole truth, or it seems like some information's missing, or that's only one person's perspective. What am I going to do now to find out more information so that I can come to a conclusion on my own? It shouldn't be the goal that the students have the same opinion as you by the end of the day. In fact, they shouldn't really know your opinion on the matter. It should be that you're presenting students with information that they can critically think and analyze about and come to their own conclusions. Really quickly, what I wanted to ask in the chat before I move on from this, because I spent a lot of time talking about the classroom environment and what that looks like, is I want to know what are some things that you think that you could do in your classroom tomorrow to promote a safe space or a space for having difficult conversations, or maybe what's something you're already doing in your classroom. Give everyone a moment to respond to those things. Some great responses in here. Adding that circle talking is really an easy change to your schedule. You don't have to do a whole lot to make it available in your classroom. It doesn't require any supplies. So that's a great thing to do. Validating your students' voices. Asking your students what they need to have a hard conversation. I appreciate that comment. So just like I asked you, what do you need to have a difficult conversation? You can ask your students those same things, because for example, the participant that shared they needed a room to walk, I might not have thought of that as the teacher, and I might not have been able to provide that had I not checked in beforehand as to what my student might need. Scaffolding your discussions, absolutely. Starting out with your pair shares, small groups, whole class. Reestablish safe boundaries, especially if we start to inch over that line within our conversations in the classroom, bringing it back to center, making sure that those are clear, those expectations are there all the time. I also don't want to sound like I'm setting you up to have these like really combative conversations in your classroom. I'm not, but they are really, the more prepared you are in your classroom for these kinds of things, the smoother it's going to go. And especially the older your students are, the more likely it is that they have kind of started to establish some of their own opinions on matters that might not be agreeable with everyone in the room. So making sure that you have thought of these things is going to be really important. Good. Letting your students see you mess up, having appropriate expectations, discussing needs, trying not to insert your opinion. That is really hard, especially when it might seem to us very clear about how everyone should feel about a matter. It can be really hard to make sure that you're trying to remain neutral. Excellent, excellent. Thank you for participating. So one of those age-old phrases we've heard time and time again is dialogue versus debate. And I think that this can be really a part of your boundaries in your classroom with your students so that they can understand the difference between dialogue and debate. And you guys can even discuss the place that dialogue and debate has in the world. There is a place for debate in the world. We are getting better at it as a society. I don't know if we are better at it. I think we're better at talking louder right now, but we do have space for debate. There are instances in which debate is important, but in these kinds of circumstances, we need to be having a dialogue. And so when students can see these clear cut differences about what that means, it's easier for them to participate in that way. So when we're talking about working towards understanding versus working towards someone being right or having a winner of the conversation, we want to be talking about having open-endedness at the end of the conversation. There's not necessarily going to be a conclusion at the end of our conversation, because we're looking for reflection and we're looking for broadening our minds, which might mean we need to seek more information at the end of our conversation. When we have a debate, that's really looking to show you I'm right. It's showing you that there's a conclusion to our conversation because I'm right. And it's excluding other opinions, whereas we're reflecting on other people's opinions when we're having dialogue. Debate is obviously very combative in nature because you're going back and forth and you're listening for the flaws in someone else's argument, as opposed to being collaborative and building on someone's answer or idea or opinion and being open-minded to those other opinions, understanding that I can listen to someone's opinion and not have the same opinion, and that's okay. I saw a really wonderful quote the other day talking about how other people's opinions are none of my business. And I thought that was really interesting to think about, like, other people's opinions are theirs, just as my opinion is mine. And we can both have those things exist in the same space, which is not necessarily the state we are in currently. So some tips for ensuring that your classroom is having a dialogue is, first of all, you need to make sure that you're building background before having a discussion. We don't want students to come to a discussion based on their assumptions about a topic. We want them to know what they're talking about and to have been given multiple perspectives of information to learn about that. So that might look like you providing research, or depending on the age level, supporting research of credible articles or opinion pieces that can provide diversity. Providing information that demonstrates diversity is really important. Not only are you going to help all of your students to feel seen in the classroom if they have differing opinions and we're reading information that demonstrates both of those opinions, then you're going to help them feel seen in the classroom. Not only that, but providing from diversity, like from a historical perspective. So I'll talk about this again later on this evening, but all of the essential understandings can be addressed from contemporary issues or controversial issues, because, for example, in essential understanding number 6, we want to make sure that we're providing both sides of the story. That history is often conflicting stories because one person has had the power to tell the story over the other, and you can't get the whole story without hearing both sides of the story. And so that's an important part of what we want to establish in our classroom. And having students paraphrase before sharing. This is an old practice. It's a good practice. When you're taking turns talking about your ideas, being able to say, I heard you say, and then rephrasing whatever they said, then you can go on to share your idea. Because what you're doing for kids there is you're really making sure that they're not just listening to say what they disagree with or why that person's wrong, right? They have to listen and understand what the other person's saying before they can respond. And then, as someone pointed out in the chat, having a scaffolding happening so that they can practice what they think and verbalizing what they think. Verbalizing is a skill our students struggle with. A lot of our native students are identified as English language learners through historical language structures, and the parts of the test have to do with speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And the part that historically, in my experience, in having done work with ELL, is the speaking is a part that holds us back, because we don't often give students the opportunity to speak about their opinions or form their opinions with speech. Because a lot of times the same kids who are comfortable talking are going to be the kids that are talking in the classroom. So when you start out by sharing with a partner, and then sharing with your table, and then sharing with the whole group, you're giving students the opportunity, all of the students the opportunity in a timely manner, to really talk about their opinions and come to their conclusions, and practicing that speech. So what does this look like for the whole classroom? Talking about controversial issues or contemporary issues can look like a ton of different things. I could list things all night, but I want to list some things that I think you guys can use in your educational environments as ways to get started. So we've talked about using multiple perspectives. Whenever we have the opportunity to use first-person narratives on a subject, that's the way to go. They were there, they should be talking about it. They were there, we should be hearing about it. And so that can be from a contemporary standpoint, that can be from a historical standpoint. When you're looking back at an issue and you want to learn more information and get more varied perspectives, you can get firsthand accounts from both sides of the story. And that's an important way. There's lots of opportunity for comparing and contrasting. What does this person think happened? What does this person think happened? What do they have in common? And somewhere in there might be our opinion of the matter, because both of these sides of the story can agree on these events, for example. We also want to start with concepts and direct discussion. So that is the making sure that we're bringing up issues and providing information before going into discussion, giving students the opportunity to form their background knowledge on the topic. Project-based learning is a great way to think about going deeper with students, because they can do this on an individual level. You can give kind of a maybe a siloed subtopic like climate change, and students can pick their own topics within that, and they can learn from each other. They can spend time researching, gathering contemporary examples of articles and opinion pieces and things, and they can dive into a topic, learn enough about it to be able to present about it, and they can present to each other and learn more information. And you're just the amount of information being shared in that way becomes exponential, because each student is doing their own topic, and then they're really getting the opportunity to share with each other. And then they're really excited because they've spent the time, they've done the work of sharing the information, as opposed to us spending the time of doing the work to share the information, which is why we're so excited at the beginning of a lesson. We're like really excited to share this information. We've done the work, we've done the research, and giving students the opportunity to have that feeling gives them some autonomy in their education, gives them some responsibility, and is going to stick with them much longer than anything you said at them, right? I saw this phrase the other day, and I really liked the phrase "ripped from the headlines teaching." My teaching partner does a lot of ripped from the headlines teaching, because she is in the chat tonight with us. Jordan was mentioned in the introduction. She does a ton of contemporary issues in her classrooms as related to something that she's already teaching. So for example, if she's working with the science teacher and doing some collaboration stuff, they will do an article together, where they will read an article together that has to do with whatever the science topic is that they've agreed on with the science teacher. And then the students are getting the opportunity to build background knowledge in her class, talk about it with their partner, talk about it with the group, think about the different ways that people might think about this topic, learn more information if that's the direction they want to go. And then they go to science class and they're going down all of the scientific information with this. So a lot of opportunity for cross-curricular connections, no matter the grade level. Even if you're in your own world in elementary and you're the person that's in charge of all of the topics, you can combine your time and bring these topics into different parts of your teaching throughout the day and make those connections. It's tried and true. We know that those are the ways that students learn more, is by having things carry throughout their day. And so giving students the opportunity to do that. And it's really, it should be enriching the curriculum you're already teaching. Similar to the way you can incorporate IFA, you're incorporating contemporary topics. So you see an article about, I don't know, immigration, and you're also talking about something in social studies having to do with immigration, then bringing those two things together so students can get the historical perspective of whatever you're talking about in social studies, whatever meets your standards, and getting the contemporary perspective. We're hitting on essential understanding number 3 every time we're talking about contemporary issues in Indigenous country, because we are showing that Indigenous people culture is alive and well, and the contemporary issues surrounding those kinds of things are really important. That also has to do with sovereignty, bringing in that essential understanding number 7, finding a contemporary issue that has to do with tribal sovereignty and discussing with your students. Does this help sovereignty? Does this hurt sovereignty? Why is sovereignty different for this tribe than this tribe? Lots of excellent connections to be made. And then sometimes this can get kind of secondary heavy, because you have to sometimes dive deep to learn about different topics, or some of the topics might not be age appropriate. That comes with knowing your classroom. Not all of the information that is important for students to know is important for them to know at kindergarten, first grade, second grade. it's up to you to know your students and know what is age appropriate for them. And so that could mean in your morning meeting, a lot of times in elementary, younger grades, we have morning meeting. We can bring in a news component to that. We can talk about something that is age appropriate, and they are getting a form of the news. It becomes a part of your daily conversations. It becomes a part of that connection to the world around them, because they're expecting to learn and talk about contemporary issues in the classroom. You can start to introduce that language. We might not call it that at kindergarten, but they're going to become more familiar with learning about the world around them in that way. And then I have free writes and current events. So having students either, if you have the opportunity to bring newspapers into your classroom, do it, because students need more hands-on news in their hands. If you don't, you can go the route of having students find an article online. You can discuss how to look for trusted sources, what those trusted sources might be, or knowing that if I find information from this source, it might be skewed in its bias, and that can be a part of writing about that current event. So they can maybe summarize the current event, talk about their opinion, and then maybe say, this was reported from this news outlet, and I think that maybe there's more information to be had, and they could do some research on that. You could also have in English class, you could have, anytime you're doing free writes, you could narrow the topic or give the prompt of a contemporary issue. So I have hashtag contemporary issue down here at the bottom, but you could put something else. So you could put hashtag climate crisis, hashtag MMIP, whatever the issue is that you want students to be writing about. They can have that prompt, and then they can go find information. They can talk about their opinions. It really gives them a lot of freedom in what they're going to be writing about, while having a centered theme for your class. So before we move on to some examples, what is one way in your classroom you already feel comfortable talking about a contemporary issue? What is one thing you do in your classroom to talk about a contemporary issue? So I'm seeing several Socratic seminars, reading the newspaper, project-based learning. Awesome. Kids News Daily with 8th grade. You can add that to the resources. Warm-up scenarios that highlight current events, posing an open-ended question for students to respond to. CNN 10. CNN 10 is a great student news resource if you've not watched that before, and it's doable in your class day because it's only 10 minutes and it talks about current issues from a student, from a age appropriate perspective. Current event activities, awesome. Glad to see it. So I wanted to be able to talk about a couple of issues. I'm going to give 2 examples of some things that we do in our school district as ways to bring contemporary issues to students that are also sensitive issues, because I think that's, I think we can probably all figure out how to guide dialogue and debate in our classroom, and we can think about what polarizing opinions might happen. We can be familiar with that. I think it's a little more troublesome to think about how to talk about sensitive issues in your classroom. So when we talked about what a controversial issue is, I included sensitive or emotional issues, because I think when you're bringing up something that could be triggering to students, affects their identity or affects the group that they're a part of, because again, a lot of us are teaching in places where we have diverse students in our classrooms. It can be kind of hard to know what to do and how to bring it up, even if it's important information to bring up. So, for example, MMIP, missing and murdered Indigenous people. These kinds of topics are important for our kids to know about, but we have to consider many things. We have to consider age appropriateness. We are not talking about these kinds of things in detail at elementary necessarily, or maybe even at middle school. The conversation changes as we get older. I'll discuss that in a moment. But we also need to think about the space in which we're talking about these things, how this might affect our students. If we have students in the classroom who are affected by that issue, for example, we need to be maybe pulling those students aside ahead of time and say, hey, we're going to be talking about this thing today. We're going to be talking about MMIP, and maybe they have a family member who's currently missing. That is too strong of a conversation to have with that student in the classroom, right? So that is going to be something that either maybe doesn't happen in that class just for the safety of that student, or only happens after you've had a conversation and found out what that student is comfortable with. But again, that's you knowing your students. You can't just bring these things up to students because you're going to be triggering to them. You're going to be bringing up a trauma for them. So these are some ways that we provide space to talk about these issues in a way that's appropriate for our students. So at the elementary level, when we talk about this issue, we're not saying murdered, right? This is not appropriate for little kids to be talking about that. But we can talk about safety. We can talk about letting someone know, more than someone, right? Letting multiple people know where you're headed. If you're walking down the street to a friend's house, mom needs to know, dad, grandpa, someone, more than one person in your household needs to know. And knowing that when you get to that place, you need to check in. These are important conversations for all students, not just for our native students, but it's having the conversation around safety and, the stranger danger kind of conversation, and then providing space to talk about or contribute in some way. So for example, this picture is of our TP project for the month of November for Heritage Month. We have had 12 teepees set up for the 12 tribal nations of Montana up at our district office building, and they have been lit every night according to different things. So the first week they were multicolored to represent the diversity within our tribes in Montana. The second week they were all red to represent and bring awareness to the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis in Montana. And so on and so forth. I'll talk a little bit more about on the next topic, what color they are this week. This is an opportunity to bring up a conversation in a family for them, for our students to learn about something and bring it up at home. The teepees are red up on the hill. Did you see that? Did you see why they're red? Can we talk about those things? Can we talk about how we need to make it a protocol in our family that when I leave this house, I tell 3 people where I'm going and I check in with those 3 people when I get there. Those kinds of conversations. At the high school level, you're going to definitely have more conversations around safety from a perspective of human trafficking and MMIP, and knowing that, okay, here in Great Falls, we have the Montana State Fair in the summertime. When you're walking down the midway and an adult male comes up and offers to buy you beer, is that a safe situation? Because a lot of high school kids are going to be like, oh, he wants to buy us beer. That's really nice of this man, right? It's having those conversations of safety for our students. And so we can also bring up awareness for these things. I had some other pictures I wanted to share, but because this is recorded, I can't put student faces in this recording. But we've had opportunities then for older students to do things or make things to bring awareness. So our community has May 5th is the recognition of MMIP. And so there's something called the Red Dress Project, and our students participate in that. They're given the opportunity to draw on words, color, decorate, whatever they feel appropriate to put on that red dress. And we make garland out of those red dresses that we hang on along the fence of one of our really busy streets. And it brings awareness to that topic on that day. So we're bringing that conversation to the community. We've had students do artwork surrounding this. Some of our students had the opportunity this summer to participate in our urban art project, which is downtown, and it's windows in a parking garage that you can put installation pieces in. And we had students take all of the garland of those red dresses that we took down after May 5th and make an installation in a window to have that conversation continue in the community. And so it's really empowering to see students participate in these kinds of conversations. When you have the opportunity, sometimes you might be able to bring a topic to your students that is something that they could maybe provide. I don't know if they could provide a solution. They might be able to provide a solution. We have our next geniuses in our classrooms. They could provide a solution, or they can be a part of bringing awareness to that topic. And so that's a great way to talk about that sensitive issue and also have students feel like they can do something. Because when you're bringing a sensitive topic to students like this, there can be a sense of hopelessness really easily, because there doesn't feel like you're like, great, you dumped all this information on me. What do I do with it now? And so giving students something as simple as an art project to do to demonstrate an action to bring awareness to the community is really empowering, and a cathartic way to bring that topic to your students and have a release of that information. I see in the comment section here, someone asked, do you think that Nora Maybe's First Nation Friday newsletter from Great Falls Tribune would be a good resource for older students? Absolutely. If you haven't already, because I think I may have suggested this in one of our previous webinars, and I see some familiar names in here. If you haven't already, go to the Tribune. I think if you just look up First Nation Friday, you'll be able to get right to the sign up. And Nora Maybe is our Indigenous writer for the Tribune here in Great Falls. And she does a really wonderful job of bringing contemporary issues to the forefront. She does a newsletter every Friday, obviously called First Nation Friday, because it gives her a little bit of leeway to talk about issues she might not be able to put in the newspaper, because there's so many deadlines and things that constrict what can go into the newspaper. So it gives her the opportunity to talk about contemporary issues, and she does such a good job of representing Native voice in her articles and going to the source and talking about things and giving people a voice to share their opinions and their concerns on a given topic. So absolutely, I do think that that would be a good resource. Obviously, you're always going to vet information before you share it with your students, but I don't think I've seen anything yet that I wouldn't be willing to share with high school students from Nora. Thank you for bringing that up. Oh, these can be heavy topics. And these examples are heavy topics. I chose them for a reason. I chose them because I think that those are the ones that are hard to talk about in your classroom. And then we'll talk in a minute about how you can get out of that kind of heavy topic situation. Another example of a sensitive topic is boarding schools. And I think we are often teaching about boarding schools from a historical perspective, as we should be. It's a part of our social studies curriculum. It's a part of, in our district, it's a part of ELA and some writing that our students have to do. But more and more in the news, we have contemporary issues surrounding boarding schools. So I'm so sorry that I didn't get a chance to go up last night and take pictures of the TVs. I'm going up tonight to take pictures of the TVs because this week they're lit up orange. for Every Child Matters, which I believe someone brought up in the chat as well, in remembrance of the students from the residential and boarding schools that didn't make it home. And I think that we can't talk about boarding schools with students and not have this floating around in the air, right? It's a topic. Our students are aware of a lot of things going on in the world around them because they have access to media in front of them 24/7 in front of their little faces. And so they see news, they see things. And so we need to give them an avenue to process that information. So at an elementary level, you're not going to be talking about mass graves. You might not even mention it in that way in your high school level, but you are able to talk about contemporary issues surrounding this. You can talk about news about how Canada is going about to start repatriation processes and how the United States is or isn't following suit. You could talk about social emotional health. When I say this, I don't mean that you're going to say, this is boarding schools and talk about it and then be like, now we need to talk about social emotional health. This is just something from a teacher perspective that you can secretly and ninja-like do for your students. The students in our classrooms are products of boarding schools. They're our native students, have grandparents and family members that attended boarding schools. And so that trickle-down effect, that generational trauma we see in effect every day, that mistrust for public schools in our classroom, while you might not be relating that directly to boarding schools for your students, it is something you can do for your students. And I think it's an important issue contemporarily. I think it's really cool to see young people taking charge of their mental and emotional health in the way that they are. And while they may not have a mental or emotional health status, they are more open to talking about mental and emotional health than any other generation previous. And I think that that is an avenue that we need to help our students explore and navigate. And boarding schools is a direct reflection of that trauma within families in our classrooms. And so when we can go down the same avenue as I was just talking about with the MMIP, we can provide opportunity for students to bring awareness to topics. We can do projects where they can research how they can help. They can do things like wear orange all on the same day to bring awareness to the situation. So making sure that, first of all, you have perspective on what your students can handle. Second of all, that you are providing safe spaces to have these conversations and to move forward into how that looks in our classroom today. Bringing up these topics, and because I don't feel like ignoring them is helpful. I don't think not talking about a topic, especially in the high school where they see these things in the news and just acting like that's not going on, is not helpful. So, heavy topics. I'm going to talk about mindset here in a little bit, but I do want to remind you that controversial topics can be heavy. Contemporary issues can be heavy, but we don't have to stick in the gloom and doom of that news world, right? If it bleeds, it leads. It's a headline for a reason, but we don't have to stick in that doom and gloom. We can share with students information, and then we can bring them to a place where they feel like they can do something about it. And whether that be to write a paper about what they would do to make sure that this area has access to clean water. It can be far-fetched. It can be something that's not going to happen for them, in their classroom. But giving students the opportunity to think that way is so important to their learning and their understanding of those issues. So what I want to do right now, we have about 20 minutes left. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some resources and showing you some resources that you can use to talk about contemporary issues in your classroom, which could also be controversial issues. Again, they don't have to go hand in hand, but it can be something that goes hand in hand right now, as I said. So I want to take you through some of these resources, but I do want you also to ask any questions that I didn't necessarily address, that you're like burning question. I really was hoping we would talk about this thing or that thing. So feel free to talk in the chat and I will try and address those issues either here at the end when I'm done showing you the resources or as I'm showing you the resources. So I'm going to actually share my internet screen so we don't have to go back and forth. Okay, so, whoopsie. The thing that's hard about sharing your screen in Zoom is that the thing that tells you you're sharing your screen is over the top of your tabs. So you can't click on what you need to click on. So one of the resources that I think is really important to contemporary issues is using primary source documents. Anytime we can use primary source documents, we need to do that. And the Library of Congress has done a wonderful job of putting together teacher topics. There's like lesson plans. So you can go down to the teacher section when you're on the home page of the Library of Congress. Maybe. Well, in a perfect world, this website would be responding for me. But when you go to the teachers page down here, you can access here we go. It was like, fine, we'll do it. You can access a lot of great resources and they have primary source document sets that you can utilize on different topics. And there are some about boarding schools in here, and there are some on other topics as well. Using those primary source documents, if someone was there or they were the ones talking about it, they experienced it, that's who we want to hear from. And so we want to make sure we're including that as well. I also wanted to share all of these resources I'm sharing are on the resource list that is in your Google, that you can access through Google Drive. But several groups got together. They're down here at the bottom. The Library of Congress, the Smithsonian, the National Archives, the United States Holocaust Museum, the National Park Service, and the National Endowment for Humanities got together and created this Native American Heritage Month website, which has access to webinars and talks and resources that you can look through that have great information for teaching, for resources. And so I just wanted to make sure I shared that because it's really good. You can go to the For Teachers section. Obviously, everything within this website is available for teachers, but within their For Teachers section, they have very specific things that they feel would be useful to teachers, and they're broken up by those different groups. So for example, this would be one of those primary source document sets. I was talking about the Library of Congress, and it has primary source documents having to do with boarding schools. So you're looking at original print newspapers, you're looking at photographs, you're looking at, I think there's some journal entries. There's some different things in here that would be great resources for you to be able to share in your classroom. What else did I want to share with you? I wanted to share with you Indian Country Today. This is a wonderful digital Indigenous news resource, and they have a ton of new information. You could get a current event from here every single day. They are just as big as other news sources in updating their information and making sure that they have new featured news on here all of the time. You can go through and get different subjects, or you can just look on whatever is the headliner for that day, but lots of really great news resources there as well. Let's see, I wanted to also go to this National Indian Law. Let's see, it opened in a different screen. Let me go to the other share for you. So the National Indian Law Library has a section of Indian Law Bulletin selected news sources. And these are going to have more to do with very specific things where you can like reference laws or federal policy or things like that. And they update it. I think they update it about once a week. So this was updated today, November 17th, and it'll be updated again next week on the 24th. And so really great information and direct links to those news resources. I think it's important. Thank you. Someone just thanked me in the comments for showing these resources. I think sometimes when you're given a list of links, it's really easy to be like, oh yeah, I'll take the time to go look through that. And then you don't get the time. But if you see it on your screen, you're going to be more interested in knowing that that is something that is helpful for you. I also included some OPI resources. Sorry, I'm in a screen that you guys can't see right now. Hold on. I also included some OPI resources, and those links are in your resource folder, and they are direct links to some guides. And so they are a guide on contemporary American Indian issues. And then on my next slide here, I have a guide for utilizing the Library of Congress as a resource in your classroom. So the last thing I want to talk about, and I have more to talk about if nobody has questions, I just want to make sure I provide space for questions on specific topics, is your mindset when you're going into this. And that is being asset-based, making sure that we're not getting stuck in that gloom and doom approach, that we're showing students how to look for information and to grow from that information, as opposed to it maybe not affecting them or settling in a negative way within themselves. And I think that's what's really important about providing students the opportunity to either bring awareness to their community or do something with the information. Even if it doesn't seem like to us as adults that like doing an art project on the topic, for example, is doing anything, it's helping our students work through and process that information. And I think that's really important, and it's really helpful. And that the contemporary issues, just like IFA, should really enrich what you're already teaching. It shouldn't be sometimes, we seek out information on how we can be better teachers and more information on these topics. And sometimes it feels like, okay, I need to do an IFA lesson today. I need to do a contemporary issue lesson today. I need to do this, that, and that other thing. But combine them. Really, you're providing a more rich experience, even if it takes a little bit longer time, as opposed to all of these things you're trying to fit in the day. Combine them and bring them together. You still have standards, you still have obligations that you have to reach within your classroom. Granted, the lists of standards, the amount of time you have to get to them might not match up, but don't let yourself get stuck in a checklist. Thinking about how you can enrich what you're teaching with contemporary issues, with IFA. A lot of IFA is contemporary issues. As I said earlier, every single essential understanding is addressable through a contemporary issues. While those essential understandings aren't necessarily written as learning objectives, they certainly can be used that way. It doesn't mean that should be the only thing that you're talking about, but it's a wonderful starting point. So if you're wanting to start talking about sovereignty, and that's a big ambiguous idea that you're not really sure how to approach, you can start by building background on what sovereignty is. And then, as I said, you could find a contemporary issue or a current event or an article where something is happening that is affecting a tribe's sovereignty, whether that be reinforcing and strengthening their sovereignty or hurting their sovereignty. and have those conversations. Why is this important? Why are treaty rights important? Why is the ability to be sovereign and independent important? And so you can help students build their own background so they have a better understanding of those topics that many adults don't have the understanding to know about. So I would like to provide some space to answer any questions before we wrap up this evening. If there was any topics that you were really hoping I would address or give some advice on that I didn't, please share that. Can you tell? Okay, the red dress lesson. So the red dress is a national movement. It's not something that we just came up with, but the way that we do it is something that actually Jordan brought to our school. And it is that we do little cutouts just on like if you fit 2 outlines of dresses on a red piece of cardstock, we cut them out and the students can write words on them or they can decorate them. We've had students write people's names on them, maybe people who are missing, as a way to memorialize them or to be thinking about them. And then we collect those all together and we hang them on the fence outside on one of our one-ways so that it can be with some like signage and information that is easy for cars to read as they go by. And it helps bring awareness on that MMIP day, which is May 5th, to talk about MMIP in the community. And so we have a really great relationship. Our Indian Education Department has a great relationship with our Human Trafficking Task Force, which is been renamed since, because it originally was just human trafficking, I believe, and then it has been renamed to include MMIP as a important topic in our community. And so we have a staff member, Jordan is a member, and our director, Dugan Coburn, goes to their meetings and plays a part in being a part of that task force and knowing what's going on in our community and in the state. And so therefore we can share that information with our students where appropriate, obviously. And so, yeah, just giving them an opportunity that when we're talking about that information to do something with it. And so they can bring awareness to the community in that way. Another question I see on here is any tips on teaching topics that are sensitive or triggering for ourselves? This is really important. Jordan and I start out our professional development a lot of times saying, sometimes we cry and there's nothing you can do about it, and just know that it's okay. So we are at a place where we can talk about some of these triggering topics, but sometimes it makes us cry. It's emotional. You have to know yourself and know what you're comfortable with. And while a topic might be important to you to share, you might not be in a place to share it yet. And so that might be where you have some collaboration with another teacher. You partner with another teacher where if you're at an elementary level, maybe you can co-teach, or maybe your class can go with the other class to learn about this information. If you're at the secondary level, maybe you can partner with another subject area and you can kind of divide and conquer on the information, stuff you're comfortable sharing, stuff that maybe the other person is comfortable sharing. I would say overarchingly, if you are not at a place where you can share information about a topic in a healthy way for other people, then it's not the time for you to share that information. Thank you for that question. Jordan says, I'm the crier is me. It's mostly Jordan, but it happens to me too. And it's important to share with people. That's that showing we're human. We are not infallible, and these are hard topics, and they're hard topics to talk about. Let's see. Any other questions? So I hope I'll watch for other questions. I'll just kind of wrap up my information for you. I hope that what you take away from this is that you don't have to conquer the world in one class. You don't have to address all of the important topics in 1 year. You can take on one thing and you can start there. And when you get comfortable with that one thing, then you can move on and you can build with it. And that's my same advice for when I'm working with teachers who have either had a bad experience or get clammed up with teaching IFA in their classroom, is start with one thing. It can be a small thing. It can be adding a contemporary article to a topic you're already teaching. It doesn't have to be a huge step aside from what you're comfortable doing. You're going to get more comfortable the more you incorporate these kind of topics into your classroom. And the double dipping, I think, is the other thing that I really want everyone to take away from this webinar tonight, is that not trying to fulfill all these checklists separately can be so overwhelming. The amount all of us are asked to do in a day is a lot. And so knowing that you can prioritize your own classroom, you are in charge of your classroom. And while you have all these lists of things to do, you can prioritize what your kids learn. And as I said at the beginning, standards are important, curriculum is important, but how your students see themselves in the world and what they learn going forward, how they become adults in the world, is more important. So giving them the skills to do that, if it takes a little bit longer in your day, if it means we didn't quite get to that spelling word, I'm an adult who doesn't know how to spell. I'm doing okay. It's okay if we don't get to those spelling words today. So I hope that that's what you're taking away from tonight. If you don't have any other questions, I am going to have Jennifer share any closing advice for you in terms of getting your renewal credits. And I thank you so much for participating in our topics this evening, and make sure you're drinking water. We all need a little extra water in our day. It helps us.
All right, and with that, I shall take a sip of water. Thank you so much, Miranda. That was incredible, and I think so timely and so needed. And I really appreciated, as what's coming across in some of the comments, how sensitive and caring and just the considerate guidance that you gave to us. So thank you so much. And of course, this will be recorded. I will hopefully have the recording ready and available on our website tomorrow. And please feel free to share that with any groups, classes, other teachers. And if you would, like this as a professional development in your school or district, please reach out to me and we can certainly create something for you. I put a bunch of links here at the end. With Thanksgiving coming up, there is some really culturally responsive Thanksgiving curriculum that is available. So please check that out if that is a topic that you are addressing. Also, we are so excited. We have finally finished our hub course that is coming up, Building Your Indian Education for All Mindset, Unpacking the Essential Understandings. Jordan Langford Forster, who Miranda referred to during the session, and Miranda did a tremendous job creating the course, and JC Jeffers, another one of our Advocacy Award winners who gave the presentation on boarding school, will also helped in the creation and will be one of the facilitators along with Miranda and Jordan. We don't have the registration open yet, but please do watch our website or email me. There will only be 30 spots available because it will be a facilitated course, not a asynchronous course where you could take classes anytime or do the coursework anytime. This will be facilitated. So super excited about that. Thank you all so very much for taking the time out to really listen to this important guidance. And if there's anything that we can ever do, Mike Jenny, myself, Stephen Morset, Zach Hawkins, please reach out to us. We are more than happy to support your journey in education, especially it can be really challenging right now. There's no doubt about that. So please reach out to us. We're here to support you. So Thank you all so much. Thank you, Miranda. This was really phenomenal. And please do fill out those feedback surveys. Even if you're not getting renewal units, again, we read them, we take them to heart. But if they're super positive, they also help us to do more programming like this, which I would love to see this presented again, maybe even as a workshop type of thing, because I think it's desperately needed right now. So Miranda, thank you so much. Whatever holiday you might be celebrating next week, or at least honoring the significance of next week, please be safe. I hope you're all staying healthy, and I really look forward to seeing you in January. So we do not have any advocacy award recipient webinar series next month, but we do coming up in January, and it's going to be really fabulous with Callie Rushi-Nicholson from Billings. So thank you all, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you in January, and have a good, safe holiday season.